Two selections from Ben Cosgrove, and it's a pleasure to have you with us here in the studio.
It's a pleasure to be here.
And thank you for coming on down. Glad we could make this happen.
Anytime.
So my guest this afternoon is Ben Cosgrove, and you are a composer. And if you want to talk a little bit about introduce yourself, talk about your music,
what am I?
Where you came from, and
I grew up on the Mass New Hampshire border, and I guess I've sort of become a wandering composer performer. So I've always written instrumental music, and in the last 5 to 10 years, it's become almost entirely about place and landscape.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a strong environmental component to your music, and it might be a little, difficult for me to explain. But if you could talk a little bit more,
I don't know if I'm any better at it than you would be. I don't know. It just happens to be that the things I'm obsessed with are the things I get most excited about and most interested in are, environmental ideas or more specifically, places. Like I love what makes Vermont different from New Hampshire.
Yeah. And place, that sense of place, has a really strong sort of a really strong pull on who we are as people and what we do aesthetically and musically. Yeah.
And it's very hard to articulate too. I think. What I found is it's actually a great subject to explore with something like instrumental music, which similarly gets right to this sort of subjective, way of engaging with the world. You're not. You don't have to explain things as specifically as you might, but I once I started writing music, that was built so directly around my own experience of the different environments I was passing through and the way I was experiencing them. I felt it really started to ring true with me a lot more than it was when I was just making, songs that sounded good to me. And
I'm wondering about sort of the writing process. Does the impact of the place you are, how am I trying to put this? Like,
what comes first?
Yeah, what comes first? Is it are you composing about the place, or is it that the place has this effect on you that influences somehow subconsciously the work that you're writing?
I mean, usually it always depends. Yeah, but it's always about a particular phenomenon that I'll become interested in. Like I have a song, maybe I'll play it later. Called Abilene that I wrote when I was driving across western Kansas for the first time, and I was just totally freaked out by how totally disorientingly
vast
flat
those spaces are. Yeah.
Oh yeah, or you couldn't really place yourself in it. Like I couldn't tell how fast I was going or how far I was from anything in my field of vision. Or you just felt like you're floating in space. And I was so fascinated by that, and I wanted to see. I mean, I've spent my whole life, listening so closely to music and figuring out how to, push buttons and do whatever. And I wanted to, when I'm writing any of these songs, I'm just trying to think of, musical tricks I can deploy that'll end up putting somebody in a similar headspace,
right,
to what I was put in when I was in this space.
Yeah, and I get that sense of intensity around that too. Like being from New England, that we have that. Everything feels very close and tight and intimate. And then when you experience Kansas, Omaha, Nebraska, places like this, that vastness is really unsettling.
Yeah. Well, it's also made me. There's nowhere like this in the world. Like I think it took me. I always loved northern New England, where I grew up, and I still feel very strongly at home here. But I don't think I fully appreciated everything. Like all of its various elements until I was frequently in places where they weren't.
Right.
It makes you much better at noticing, what makes a place feel like home to you is like when you're, driving through some place where, you don't have that kind of, what's around that, that road, or like all our roads follow rivers, and all of like the trees are all kind of a certain way, and they were logged, 150 years ago, and like it's I don't know. Being in other places that have been managed differently, or that have different, natural shapes, makes you kind of notice the ones that you're surrounded by all the time a little better.
Yeah, it's sort of odd when we look at, we're surrounded by trees and forests and heavily wooded hills, and it's weird to think that there was a time when none of those trees were there, and these are the new trees.
Oh yeah,
as opposed to a place like Kansas where there was never any trees, and it's like that impact on the land and the people who grew up there is a very different experience.
Yeah. Do you know Tom Wessels at all?
I don't believe so.
He's an ecologist. I guess he teaches. I think he lives down near Brattleboro. But he has an awesome book. He's got this big beard. He's a very sort of iconic looking dude, and he's got a great book called "Reading the Forest: The Landscape," in which like each chapter opens with a picture of a forest, and then he'll spend 20 pages explaining like everything you can tell about. There was a fire 80 years ago, and like there's it rains a lot here, and like. I read that book 10 years ago and it blew my mind.
And that talent for reading the landscape is something that we've lost. I think that would have been second nature to almost anyone living here 100 years ago.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, think it whatever can get you more. I mean, if there's been a principle underpinning all the music I've written, it's been the idea that I might be able to be helpful if only by drawing people's attention to what's around them. Like even if like my experience of Kansas isn't consistent with yours, if it makes you kind of think about why that might be,
right?
Then you've got somebody thinking about Kansas and like maybe we shouldn't put a Walmart here, like that kind of thing.
And when you're writing this music and you're thinking about this place where you're at, and you want to express how you feel about it, it's how. Like what's the trick? What's the workaround for creating a sense of place on a musical palette?
I don't know. I mean,
it's a complicated question, I know, but
yeah, no. I mean, I've tried and failed a lot. And that, yeah, I write a lot of music and I throw a lot of it away, and it'll come back 5 years later or something. But and I ultimately distill it down to like the 13 songs that appear on a CD.
Right. And you also write extensively on environmental themes, not just musically, but also academically.
Yeah, I wouldn't say academically, but yeah.
Essays and this sort of thing. What's your background?
Why do I do that?
Yeah, what's your background? Because it's not just music that you studied. It's
I went to a liberal arts college, which was great for me because I that wasn't necessarily in the cards. And I'm so glad I did because it was an opportunity to not hang out with musicians for 4 years. I really got into. I took a creative nonfiction class at some point, and it really kind of blew my head open. I loved the idea of being able to engage with things in a very kind of direct and honest, explicit way. When you're writing music about these ideas, it's necessarily pretty abstract. Like you have to zoom out a lot and then re-engage with it with a totally different set of hands and tools and things. And when you're doing a piece of journalism, you're writing an essay, I find it, when I first started, I just found it so refreshing. It was like a splash of water on your face to just be able to kind of like say what, there's you write exactly what there is and write what that guy said and explain why it matters to you.
It's not subjective the way music is.
It is, but it's still subjective, but you're able to kind of articulate it more cleanly. Like you're able to kind of do more wondering about why you feel that way or why that. I don't know. I've kind of fallen off the horse lately because it's there's been so much music stuff going on. But
part of that juxtaposition between the art of the music and the environmental sort of awareness stuff that you've been doing manifests itself in these residencies that you're doing as part of these, I guess, are part of national park services or state park services.
Yeah, I've done a couple.
Yeah, and most recently the White Mountain thing. You want to talk a little bit more about that?
So I haven't. I just came through. I'm very excited about that. I'm the 2015 artist in residence for White Mountain National Forest, and it's this it's a residency they haven't been doing for very long. I think. I'm
not really quite sure what it is. If you can explain it.
I'll do my best. I think I haven't done it yet, but I think I'm the first musician to have done it. They've had writers and painters and photographers in the past, which makes sense because I think for a lot of these sort of land management organizations that host artist residencies, a lot of it is public relations. Like you're able to kind of, if somebody's taking these beautiful photos, you can like draw attention to the land you're
Sure. Yeah.
you know, whatever. What I'll be doing is they're putting me up down near the Sandwich Range in the base camp down there.
Okay.
And I'll be kind of exploring around the region, and I think they want me to write short essays, and I'll be doing some performances, and I'll ultimately be writing some music that I'll give to the Forest Service.
Now, is this a teaching kind of thing? Are you going to be doing workshops?
There will be some workshops, I think, and a few. I'm kind of talking to them right now about exactly what it'll look like. I'm going on tour next month, to Michigan and Minnesota and stuff like that, and then I come back at the end of August, and then I'll go straight up to the mountains, and I'll be there for September or into October.
And you're going to live at the base camp? Are you tenting out? Like, what's the...
I think a combination thereof. It'll be a good exercise in self-control. Being able to justify it as much, non-working and as...
Yeah. I take it you're an avid hiker.
I am, yeah. I'm wearing hiking boots right now. So you never know.
So let's... do you feel like playing us a little tune?
Yeah, we can do that.
Yeah, let's not exhaust all of our topics of conversation right up front.
I've told you everything I know.
Yeah, let's give people a little taste of what it is that we're talking about here.
Okay, this is called Montreal Song. This is another song from Field Studies.
Mm-hmm.
Might take these. And let me know if it's too loud or too soft.
That was exquisite.
Oh, thank you.
It was really beautiful.
Exquisite. I always shoot for exquisite.
And always way more fun to see it live and listen to it on the
Yeah,
computer.
I know. I mean, you're the only one who gets to see the weird facial expressions I make when I when I play them.
I saw you looking over your shoulder there. Is your sheet music on the ground?
Yeah, no, I don't. I have no idea why I do that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, for those
I thought
of
you were reading
who
something.
Can't see the impression we're doing of me right now. I contort myself in really bizarre ways. I was kind of unaware of that for many years.
Mm-hmm.
And then I saw my friend took a video of me, or somebody posted a video online of me playing a song, and I was like, I watched and I was horrified. And
Do I really do that?
Well, no, I was like, why did you pick this? Like all this weird footage of me just looking like a lunatic, and he sort of looked at me bewildered and said, "You always look like that."
That's funny.
And I've only been aware of it since then. But I assure you that it's all not on purpose.
Yeah, well, it's funny to see because your hands are full, and
yeah, exactly. I got to put my head somewhere. So
yeah, I'm always surprised how many guitar players I've seen pictures of who don't realize they stick their tongue out when they play.
Oh,
it's
yeah,
that same kind of thing.
Yeah, it may be that. Unconsciously, the reason I'm bringing my head into my shell is that, I'm concealing whatever grotesque facial expressions I'm making from the.
Well, the piece that we just heard, that was Montreal song, right?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It's the second song on Field Studies.
Yeah, and it's like I said, it's a beautiful piece, and I'm wondering where the title came from. Were you responding to being in Montreal?
Yeah, it's one of the fuzzier ones. It's not as easy a story as the Kansas one, for instance. But it's generally about you're on this island. It's a sort of the sense of that place. I've always been really interested in Montreal. I love that town.
It's a fascinating city,
and there's sort of water going around you on all sides, and water like coming down this mountain, flowing through the city out to the thing. And
there's much more a sense of being on an island in Montreal than there is in, say, New York. You're still on an island. But,
certainly. I think part of it is the way. I mean, I think the New York grid really messes with you. Mm-hmm. Like you don't really have a. I mean, also Manhattan's sort of more manageably shaped, I guess, than the island of Montreal.
Right.
But like all the different kind of compartments of Montreal, I always thought was neat how they kind of.
Montreal versus Laval, or versus,
and they all kind of collide with each other in unexpected ways, and they've got this sort of inconvenient mountain in the middle that they've got to work around, and New York didn't really have to deal with any of that. It was because there's.
They had to manufacture their environmental spaces.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
They worked with it in a kind of a cool. I mean, the reason if you ever look at New York from the side, there are like skyscrapers here, and then there's a low like Greenwich Village, whatever. It's low, and skyscrapers here at the bottom, and it's just because here it was fill, and there's all this sort of schist and bedrock. Here in where Midtown is, and down at the end where the Battery is, and all of this stuff. And it's weird how you can sort of look at this, totally artificial skyline and see, geology.
Well, when we talk about, environmental issues, environmental studies, we talk about art in response to the environment. Like we're always thinking about these sort of natural landscapes,
right.
The woods, the forests, the mountains, the plains, or whatever. But we tend not to think about our urban spaces as environments,
right?
Or natural environments, and they have their own ecosystems.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'm wondering how that's like different than, say, if you're off in the White Mountains or on the Pacific Coast, or how does that the urbanity affect?
I mean, I don't know. I try not to draw a distinction usually, but it's hard to. I mean, the only difference is that I guess you feel more of a sense of responsibility when you're in if you're in a desert, that gives you a sense of, sort of existential despair and discomfort. You can sort of write it off as like, this is the effect of being this. But when you're in a man-made space that has that same effect, you sort of feel like the problem. Right. So I've one of the songs on Field Studies is called Palo Alto, and it's kind of about that sort of sprawling. I was walking through the town and sort of had this. I started just imagining what a crane shot would look like of where I was standing, and you'd sort of see this sort of commercial strip just sort of extending for 100 miles north and south, like all the way, the whole thing. So
a sea of stucco.
Yeah, sea of stucco, of asphalt and stucco.
Yeah, well, I noticed that because when you introduced the piece, you said this is a sort of a different one, and it's and I'm wondering if it's because of that urban sensibility around it.
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, one of the
is it more cultural than environmental in a way? What
yeah,
you're
in a
responding
bit.
to?
I think so. I think that the song I just played, the Montreal one, is definitely. I think it has more to do with sort of the sort of natural process systems and processes happening within that urban system. And I think that one of the things that's cool about that city is you really don't have a sense of that, basic topography and that basic sort of, all those systems being smothered at all by as dense as that urban fabric is, I feel like you still can, you always have a sense of where you are, where the river is, where the pill is, you see it from anywhere.
Well, if you're not a native to Montreal, that's how you find your way around the city.
Totally.
You drive towards the mountain, drive towards the river, that's how you figure out where you're going. And I think you have much more of that sense than you might have in other places.
I mean, I think part of that is I care a lot about that, and I think part of that is growing up in New England. That's something that you can almost always do here. I mean, even in Boston is great for this. Like it's built around. There's even, I think there's even a conscious decision. And in the '60s, they've I can't remember his name. Kevin Lynch, I think, wrote a book called The Image of the City, and he talked about how the planners of Boston, even through the mid 20th century, were thinking about triangulation as an important thing to preserve. So if you're somewhere in the city, you can always see two or three, you can always see the Hancock Tower, you can always see the Prudential Building, you can always see the Customs House Tower, whatever it is, wherever you are, and you can use those to figure out where you are, because the streets don't make any sense.
Right. They really don't.
But as long as you're rarely, if ever, in a place where you don't have line of sight with something that, will give you information about where you are.
I hadn't thought about it that way.
Yeah. No. I remember reading that and thinking, my God, he's right.
One of the things I noticed being a child of the East Coast is why I moved out to L.A., and I found that I was following my sense of direction the way I normally would, and would find that I was constantly going in the wrong direction. I was always driving south when I was supposed to be driving north. And after a while, I realized it was because the ocean was on the wrong side.
It's on the wrong side.
Right.
I know exactly what you're talking about. I was just in Oregon for 5 months, beginning of this year.
Was that the Sitka thing?
Oh yeah, it was awesome. But I experienced exactly the same thing, and it became very inconvenient because I was living right on the ocean, and the sun goes down over it was the weirdest thing I'd ever experienced.
And I could get the concept of I'm on the West Coast and the sun sets here, but just that sort of innate sense of direction that we don't even know is completely tied to our environment. And
or as soon as you stop thinking about it, I would get on, Route 18 going east instead of west because I was going towards the ocean. So.
Yeah. Talk a little bit about the Sitka thing, because it's similar, I think, to the White Mountain.
In a way, it was different in a I don't know. It's sort of a.
Tell people what it is first.
Well, it's a very cool thing. It was started out there in the 70s by. Excuse me.
Actually, I have to do the legalese here. For those of you who have just tuned in, I'm sitting here with composer Ben Cosgrove, who's gracious enough to come down to the studio and play a few tunes for us. Time now is 1:01 p.m. You are listening to WGDR Plainfield, WGDH Hardwick Community Radio from Goddard College. So tell us more about the Sitka. What was it again?
The Sitka Center for Art and Ecology.
Right.
When I guess I stumbled on it in one of my regular Google searches for art and ecology. Mm-hmm. It was founded like I said, in the 70s by a sculptor and printmaker and general art named Frank Boyden and his wife Jane Boyden, who's a pianist. Mm-hmm. And it's a really cool thing. Their summers are very full. They host all these workshops and
it was another artist residency kind of gig.
Yeah, it was. But it was one of the few I've done with other artists. Mm-hmm. And they were from all over the world, and they were all working in different fields. There was and the brilliance of the Sitka residencies, they host both artists and environmental scientists. So I was there. I was a musician, and there was a man there who wrote natural history essays, and his wife was a landscape painter and still life painter. There was a marine biologist. There was a forest ecologist.
Wow.
There was a mixed media artist. There was a painter from Japan, and there was a sculptor from Taiwan. And everyone made art that was everyone was there because they made art that was kind of sensitive to, environmental subjects, or they took as their subject matter these sort of biological ideas or whatever. Or they were scientists who wanted to hang out in the Oregon coast for a few months and kind of indulge all the artists who would be peppering them with questions and things. But they were very, the intent of the residency, I think, for Sitka is it's more community based. Like, we didn't have to, it was unusual among residencies in that I didn't have to give them anything at the end. I didn't have to produce a work that I would then sort of present to the
so it wasn't a finished product that you were expected to produce.
It was more like we've got this little campus in the woods, and they cared a lot about community service. So we each gave workshops, or we gave presentations to the community, or we would volunteer in schools, or we would go. And it's great because the coast is very kind of rural. It's very, especially during the winter, there aren't many people there, and so it became this very kind of this great little nucleus, and everyone kind of come through. And it's outrageously beautiful too. It was
I bet. So how was it like collaborating? Like,
it was brilliant.
Yeah. But what was the process like? I'm really obsessed with process. I'm going to ask you a lot of these questions.
Oh, no, it's great. I don't think about it enough. It's like, I don't know. It's like looking a gift horse in the mouth. I don't know. I did a lot down there that was collaborative. I wrote, the mixed media artist made a film, and I wrote music about it that was based on kind of the before I saw the film, I wrote music about the site where she had filmed it. And then we kind of found ways to work them in together, and we made this film that we sent off to some places. I don't know, it was mostly just great talking to these people. A lot of them had been at it for longer than I was, and because of the nature of what I do, I don't really find myself in a position where I'm able to talk to other artists very much. And it was very kind of gratifying to meet and talk to people who have been doing this and like made this their careers and have been treating it like work. And it was neat to kind of, I'm still kind of new at this. So,
did you find that talking to environmental scientists informed what you do musically in a way that maybe it hadn't prior to that?
Yeah, or at least it gave me more material.
Yep.
Like, I don't know, I get excited about those ideas, and then my means of kind of scratching that itch, or, getting it off of my, my mental desk is like making some form of music about it.
Did you always start out with the piano and approaching music from this level, or did you start out in a band? Like, what was your sort of...
Oh, to begin with, I started... I don't know.
What was your nascent musicology?
My nascent musicology? Okay, well, the whole biography is I started off as a piano player when I was little. And I...
How little?
Quite little. I was 4, so we moved to a new house, and the previous owner didn't want to deal with this upright piano. Yeah. So, and so I would pick out stuff, and my parents were like, "Oh, good. Well, he's terrible at baseball. So that'll be his thing." Right. And luckily for me, I took it. I mean, and everybody, I guess, because I would have been annoying otherwise.
Did you come from a musical background? Were your parents musicians?
No. Neither of my parents played an instrument. One of my grandfather plays piano and accordion by ear a bit, but no, there's no musicians anywhere around. So I mean, I think that actually worked out well for me in the long run. I think like once it became clear at a young age that this was a thing I was very serious about, there was never much resistance to it. I mean, my parents have always been very, very supportive, and I think a lot of that comes from like, oh, we don't know where, like, it seems fine to me. But yeah, no musicians in the. And
so where did you go from there?
Well, I don't know. I started kind of writing little songs, and I would kind of play around town. But once I started recording, which is sort of this very long involved process. I had a teacher who helped me out with it, and I would stay after school and use the school sort of like 4-track thing, and I became just totally obsessed with multi-track recording. And so I would you'd write the song on piano, or you'd write a song on guitar, and I made a CD that way, and then with the proceeds from that, I bought and I'm in middle school, so I bought my own equipment, and then
the proceeds from the CD you made in middle school.
Yeah, and it was very. I don't think I appreciated at the time that was unusual.
Yeah.
But yeah, I became. I didn't really perform much is what I'm getting around to until after I graduated from college, because the where I felt most at home was in this sort of studio environment where you could kind of like, I love the idea of making something sound like the inside of your head.
Mm-hmm.
And when I'm making a CD, like the stuff you played at the top of the show,
right?
Like that to me is just like that's what the world sounds like to me, and it's so satisfying to be able to make that. To just labor over something for months and months until everything's exactly right. And if that requires, a thunderstorm or like a pot and pan or, whatever.
The soundtrack to your inner film.
Oh, yeah, I guess so. And you can just sort of tweak something until it's like a collage, and you can just kind of play around with it until it, until it rings true to you. How
do you know it's done? That's such a...
I guess, like it never. I think when you're, I don't know, that the test that I always just say, like when it starts to sound like the inside of your head. Like,
okay.
Like when it that's
when you finish. What I'm wondering is when you finish an album,
mm-hmm.
like, do you start thinking about like all of the ideas and concepts that didn't make it into the final edit, and does that start the itch for the next thing that you're going to do, or?
That would make sense, but I don't know. No, normally not. I think there's always a year, like the year after an album comes out, I'm always sort of, if I've done it right, that doesn't happen, and I'm able to sort of think like, and instead the anxiety is like, well, that was it. That's
right.
That's what I have to make. Like I don't know what I'll do, and then after several months, then I'll happen to listen to the CD again and think like, what was I thinking? And that's always a great sign, because then that the next thing you make will,
right.
You've changed enough that you'll make something that's new and different.
You'll develop off of that.
Yeah, or you hope it's evolution rather than de-evolution.
Talking about the soundtrack to your inner film, you've also done a lot of soundtracks to actual films.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk a little bit about some of the films that you worked on?
Yeah, they've mostly been documentaries.
Mm-hmm.
I just have happened to run into filmmakers who, maybe because of where my enthusiasms are. There's a lot of sort of like environmental filmmakers and stuff who I've crossed paths with. And
anything we might know?
They've mostly been small. I worked with a group called Bristol Cone Media out in California.
Mm-hmm.
They made a documentary about Mono Lake, which is this saline lake. Very cool story. We're just kind of on the eastern edge of Yosemite, up in the Sierra, very like high desert, and it's a long way from Los Angeles, and yet this whole valley and the lake itself were drained when they built that like Mulholland built that aqueduct and all over there. And so this environmental group started in the 70s to restore the level of the lake to somewhere where it could actually sustain the original ecological situation up there. And they're still not quite. It's really terrifying. But
and it's a saline lake, you said?
Yep.
Is it a trapped bit of inland sea, or?
Yeah, but that area is just so weird and beautiful. But
I'm thinking about the Salton Sea, but Salton Sea is completely artificial.
Yeah, it's not like that. Salton Sea is completely artificial. Is that true?
Yeah, I believe so.
Oh wow, I didn't realize that. I don't know as much about that area. That Salton Sea is like one of the most aggressively terrifying places I've ever been in my life. Or like inhospitable. That's a strange environment.
Oh
man, yeah. Absolutely. And I remember like getting out of my car to look at it, and I was immediately like set upon by all these weird bugs, and it was 110 degrees, and the land is this weird color, and there's no people. It was, I don't know.
Did it inspire any music?
Not yet. I think I put it from my head as quickly as I could. Just drove as fast as I could to Arizona.
Freshwater.
Yeah, right. But anyway, sorry, I got totally derailed. That was one of the first films I scored. I did some stuff in college, I guess. I had friends who were film students, and
it has a very your music has a very sort of cinematic, thematic quality to it.
Definitely,
I find very engaging.
Well, thank you. Yeah, no, it's something I've learned to embrace. I thought for a while I thought it was too swoony, But I think, I just feel things very strongly, and that kind of comes out in the stuff. And that does end up, as you say, working well for stuff like films and theater and whatever. I'm doing a podcast right now. I'm writing music for a podcast for some people out in Minnesota.
Interesting.
That's this weekend's obligation.
So you're keeping busy, working?
Oh man, yeah, busier than I always expect. I think it's
I have a lot of guests on this show, and a lot of them are emerging artists, and I always say that if you are a musician and that's what you do for a living and you're paying your bills doing it, you made it. That's never mind superstardom or gold records or any of the rest of it. If you can support yourself doing this, congratulations.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I think the trick has been keeping the number of bills that you actually have to pay down to a minimum.
There's also a tremendous amount of managerial work that's involved.
Yeah.
I mean, do you work through a management company, or are you just completely booking yourself and booking your shows?
Actually, well, for the most part, I kind of sometimes, like most of this year I've booked myself just for but generally I work with a booking agent for most of it. Generally speaking, and he's going to book my fall tour and stuff like that.
Nice.
I think I just had a moment last year where like I realized that if he went away, I would be totally powerless to contact any of these venues. So I wanted to just remind myself that I remembered how to do this. So the national tour I did in May, and in January I did myself. And the stuff in August was also me.
Cool. Do you want to play us another song?
Yeah, sure. I can do. I'll play you a new song. This is not on either of the CDs you have there.
That'd be great. I always love a debut on this show.
Yeah, sure. This is I had an artist residency, since we were talking about these, at Isle Royale National Park, which is in I know your facial expression is correct. It is the least visited national park in the lower 48 states.
Really? Where is it?
It is in the middle of Lake Superior. It's a 50-mile long island.
Wow.
Just ridges. It looks a lot like the coast of Maine, I would just.
And when they say an artist resident, they motorboat you out there and drop you off with some supplies?
So it's a 6-hour ferry ride from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan.
Wow.
Which is itself like,
a long ferry ride.
Yeah, you get to the Upper Peninsula, you're already, you're out there. And then, for 6 hours, you're on this boat, and then they drop you off, and there are no roads. It was a tremendous experience. It was one of the most beautiful and amazing places I've ever been. And it was my longest experience being on an island, without electricity or plumbing or the whole thing. And you're surrounded by, this big, like the biggest freshwater lake in this hemisphere anyway.
Right. And if there's no electricity, I'm assuming you didn't go out there with an electric piano.
Right.
I'm assuming you didn't bring it upright. Like what?
No.
What were you composing?
So believe it or not, I brought this thing out there because the visitor center has electricity, and and I gave a couple. One of my obligations was to workshop, talk, performancing. Sure. So I was able to kind of go into sneak into the visitor center in the dead of night and remember how to play the piano.
Nice.
But a lot of it was abstract. I kind of went out and I wrote ideas down and kind of dedicatedly hiked all over the island as much as I could while I was out there. And there were people the situation out there is interesting. There are all these families who have cabins on the 99% of the island is designated wilderness, but there are life leases on sort of fishing cabins and vacation homes and so. And so there's this extant community of people out there, and they really kind of welcomed me in and showed me how to, eat.
I'm sure there's not a great variety of musical entertainment to be had on the island.
No, it's true. I was pretty exotic.
Yeah.
But it was really interesting. It was a great experience. Cool. And the song is something from that. It's going to be on the. Well, I'll tell you afterwards where it'll show up next. Ideally,
does it have a title yet?
It has a couple. I think it's going to be called Grace Harbor.
All right.
Unless I come up with something better.
Well, let's hear it.
All right.
Ben Cosgrove. To be 100% honest, I could skip all the talking and have you just do that.
That's normally what I do. So this is
Let's talk about your acts. I was listening to some of your music in preparation of the interview and looking at a couple of videos, and I noticed that in every one you have an electric piano or a digital. It's not an acoustic piano. It's
always
amazing.
this one.
Yeah. Okay. So tell me a little bit about this.
I will go to bat for this piece of machinery. I mean, this is more, this is my significant other. Mm-hmm. It's made by Korg. It's an SV1. It's got this vacuum tube in it. It's I don't know. What I like about it's very simple. It doesn't really try to be anything it's not. It's
just a piano.
It's got a good, there's kind of a neat little, it does a good sort of Rhodesy thing.
Right.
And there's an organ in it that's okay. The Rhodes is quite good, actually. And when I'm playing with bands and things, I use that more. But the piano is really what I cared most about. And I can't say enough about it. There's enough kind of onboard EQ and stuff. You can kind of make it exactly what you need for it, or you can tailor it to the space pretty well.
Nice.
But I think it's mostly just the reason I like it so much is I've come to know it so well. Like it's just become a part of me.
It sounds fantastic. It's and I love the notion that it has a vacuum tube in it.
Yeah, isn't that great? It looks cool too. I mean, it makes it looks like you're sort of flying this airplane.
It's very mod.
Very mod. Yeah, very retro. It's I know I feel bad. I taped over it says Korg secretly on the back here, but I covered it with a USGS sticker because I figured until Korg starts paying me money, I'm going to advertise Mount Monadnock instead.
Nice. Talking about playing with other bands, there's 90 Mile Portage.
Yep.
There's another collaborative project of yours. Do you want to talk about some of these other projects?
Yeah,
because that was a very different thing than all the other stuff.
Oh yeah, no, it's. I mean, I think that's for me. That's the appeal. I don't know. I mean, because most of what I listen to is not. I don't listen to a lot of. I listen to hardly nothing that sounds. Hardly anything, not hardly nothing. That sounds like what I actually end up producing.
Right.
I listen to a lot of folk music. I listen to a lot of kind of.
It all had that sort of aspect to it. It was this.
Yeah, I'm a big folky guy. I mean, I kind of came up in Cambridge, Somerville, which is a very good area for that kind of thing. I'm sure that had something to do with it. I fell in with this like stompgrass, bluegrass Americana band from Minneapolis. Mm-hmm. The first year out of college, when I was living in East Cambridge and starving, I met this guitar player and this banjoist, and they were briefly in Boston. Banjoist was finishing up at Berkeley, and the guitarist was there for some other reason. And we really hit it off. And so at the end of that year, when I went on kind of the perpetual tour that I've been on ever since, and they moved back to Minnesota, we just sort of started arranging to meet up in various parts of the country, and I'd do, a week with them in North Carolina or a week with them in Wisconsin or something.
Nice.
And it was, for me, it's great because normally my touring system is just me in a car and this keyboard. Mm-hmm. And so it was really great to kind of like park for a few days, like put everything in this van and ride around with a bunch of,
other folks.
Yeah. Exactly. It was just a totally different experience, different kind of keyboard playing. It was great too because I could play other instruments. So they'd have me play accordion or trumpet or whatever I could convince them to bring me on board for. Yeah.
Your build is a multi instrumentalist composer, and I was wondering what other instruments you played.
Oh, the rocks! I listed them all in the booklet over there. I don't know. I kind of went for breadth and not depth until 5 years ago or so, I realized I was going to have to perform a lot more than I was in order to be kind of financially viable. And that's kind of when I became, I would start describing myself as a keyboardist. Mm-hmm. But prior to that, I mean, it was all in the service of making these records. And so I'd play, there's a glockenspiel in there. There's like a auto harp and guitar, all sorts of weird guitars. And I play upright bass, and I play, a bunch of horns, trumpet, trombone, euphonium. I was a euphonium player all through high school. I was a forgotten chapter of my life. Yeah, I know. I don't know. There's
really, not a lot of euphonium music out there.
No, I know. Isn't it a shame? It's really a sadly overlooked instrument. It's like a French horn with oomph. But no. I mean, long way of saying I play a little bit of everything, and that it's good to. I don't play any wind instruments. I don't play clarinet, saxophone, flute. Because I've had to draw lines, and I don't sing. I don't. That's a hard line.
Yeah, all of your solo music is all instrumental.
Yep. Except there's one on field studies where a friend of mine sang, which was
when you have a guest vocalist.
Yep,
right.
exactly.
Yeah, and you're billed as a composer, and I'm sure that you get this question a lot of like, what kind of a composer are you? Are you a classical composer? Are you a jazz composer?
Well, I was hoping you could tell me. Yeah.
Like, how do you answer that question? It's like when someone says, "Oh, I'm a painter," and then you ask them what kind of painting they do. It's like, are you an abstract painter? Or are you like, what's your answer to that question?
I'm a landscape painter. Yeah. No, the way I usually, the question is ordinarily like, oh, I'm a musician. They say like, oh, what kind of music do you play? And I say instrumental. And then while they're wrestling with that, I've detached and gone off to different conversations. Right. But sometimes, like, if there's a follow-up, I usually don't know what to... Because I've said it's like film music without a film attached.
Nice. That's good.
I mean, it's certainly not classical music. It's, I don't know. And the places I tend to perform are, I'm the only instrumental act in a sea of singer-songwriters.
Right,
I'm sort of more like I don't know. And I think that like the way my performances are generally shaped is more like what a singer-songwriter would do. I'm like a singer-songwriter who doesn't sing. I'm just a player-songwriter.
Yeah. Well, I think you kind of hit on the head when you said I'm a landscape painter, because we were talking earlier about like doing these artist residencies in these places, and saying like photographers and painters, and then almost anachronistically there's you as a musician, and we're used to thinking about when we think about art and the environment, we're used to thinking about the visual arts. Ansel Adams and his photography, George O'Keeffe and her painting, and it's like we're used to this visual medium for expressing our appreciation for the environmental world, and it's much less concrete when we're talking about music, and yet for the same, it appeals. Being out in nature appeals to all of our senses, and yet we tend to focus only on that one aspect. And it's you're a landscape pianist.
Absolutely. I mean, that's definitely how I conceive of myself, or of the work I do anyway. It's I think I have patterned my work more after landscape painters or essayists even. Like I read a lot of. I'm an obsessive, like I read Edward Abbey and
the late
John Muir and all. I love nature writing, and I think of myself as sort of a nature writer without the words.
Monkey Wrench Gang changed my life.
Yeah. Oh man, what a great book.
Read that when you're 19, man.
Oh no, I read. I drove across the Southwest with my girlfriend at the time. She lives in Burlington now, actually, by astonishing coincidence. The first time I had gone through the Southwest, and she was reading this book aloud, and by total coincidence, we kept finding ourselves in exactly the area that was being described in the book. Well, sort of, ever since everything's blowing up, it's never really a great... like, we were going over the Glen Canyon Dam in the first scene. But, yeah, no, he's fantastic. And, like Wendell Berry, and I don't know. I really like people who kind of are trying to zoom in on their own, or the details or the nitty-gritty of their attachment, or the nature of their attachment to a place, be that a natural environment or a man-made one, or usually some combination of the both.
I noticed the track "Good Fences" in your New England.
Yeah, did you catch that?
Yeah, I did.
That's it's my Robert Frost
homage.
Tip of the hat. Yeah, the Yankee Division was a cool. There's another one on there that the title is "When You Are a Road," which comes from. Do you know Donald Hall?
I don't believe I do.
Oh man, if you take nothing away from this conversation, go home and read everything Donald Hall ever wrote.
Will do.
The greatest. I'm right now in another period of total obsession. He was the poet laureate for a little while. He lives over in New Hampshire, and he's just this. He's kind of a cranky old man, amazing poet. But he wrote an essay in which one of the lines was, I'm going to make sure I get it right. Oh, he's talking about the extraordinarily well plowed road in the winter that he lives on, And he says, yeah, social welfare is magnanimous in New Hampshire only when you are a road. And I thought that for some reason the back half of the sentence had such an exalted sound.
New Hampshire is justifiably famous for their plowing.
That's true.
They're very good.
I mean,
these are important issues.
Exactly. That's pretty much the only the only use of state funds that there is.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, that album is all about the title Yankee Division comes from the Route 128 is called the Yankee Division Highway. It's named after a regiment from I believe World War II, and but ironically, it's also it serves as dividing line between kind of urban Massachusetts and the rest of it.
Right.
So I love the idea that the Yankee Division Highway was also sort of dividing all these Yankees. And so there's a song named after that, and everything on there is about some New Englandy thing.
Well, it's kind of true because everything west of that line still qualifies as New England to the rest of New England.
Oh yeah,
but everything east of that line is
that's Boston. Yeah, that's it. They do their own thing. Yeah. No, I think. Yeah, that whole album was written during a period of unusual obsession with New England geography.
I was wondering when you wrote that album, or the majority of it, were you living in New England at the time, or were you somewhere? Okay.
Yeah, and then it kind of and then shortly after I made that album was when I started driving around the country constantly, and have been ever since. And that field study is broader in its scope. So all those places are, here, there, and everywhere.
Do you want to talk real briefly about the because there's Prairie Fire, Nashua. I mean, just looking at the titles, you can see. Mm-hmm. You want to talk briefly about kind of where the sort of the songs, where they come from versus the regions, like.
I mean, in most cases, like I was saying earlier, they're more. I would never be so presumptuous as to say I was sort of like presenting a definitive portrait of a place.
Of course not.
Yeah. I think when I say I think of myself as a landscape painter, one of the things I like most about landscape paintings by painters is you see they're never photographs. They're always there. There's something off, or there's something that's been prioritized over something else, and I think the greatest thing you can take away from even like a Hudson River School painting where it's all sort of meticulous and you see much more about what that artist noticed or what they cared about in rendering the scene. Yeah. And so what these really are just sort of documents of my, enthusiasm over these places, or if not enthusiasm, your fascination.
Your place in them.
Yeah, exactly. So the Nashua one is about the river. It kind of, and the structure of the piece is kind of built around, you kind of follow this from its headwaters and joins together and shoots around and ends up in this city and joins the Merrimack and goes out to the ocean.
When we talk about like the environmental themes in your work, it's generally from a sort of an appreciative aspect of these are sort of meditations on these places that you are. But obviously in any course of environmental study, you're just confronted constantly with this sense of environmental destruction and devastation. Yeah. It's just a modern side effect of the world we live in now. How does that play into your work, or does it?
I don't know. I have this weird, possibly irrational thing where I'm troubled by art that has a purpose or an intent. So I've never really made anything that is. I don't know.
It doesn't confront those issues.
I've never written a quote unquote like persuasive essay in my music. It's always been sort of here's what I see. But I don't know. It's because it's music and all of these feelings are sort of laid bare on the table. Mm-hmm. I think it would be easy to write something that was very kind of hackneyed or
trite
or heavy-handed. Mm-hmm. If I were writing, let's be honest, the stuff that's happening out there is just horrible. And so I think, not that isn't interesting to me, but I think it it requires
a different kind of art.
Yeah, I think what I'm doing, working in music, it's sort of so abstract that to talk about something like that, it would be very hard to do it without making it overblown. That said, do you know John Luther Adams?
No.
Oh man, he's a composer. For years he was like the Alaskan composer, and he lived up in the woods in Alaska, and he wrote this beautiful music. It was all inspired by place and landscape, and usually Alaska. He won the Pulitzer Prize not this year but last year for this gorgeous, like huge symphonic work he wrote called Become Ocean. And it was all like, the idea behind it was, rising seas and that kind of thing. But even, and it was like, he wrote this great essay in which he kind of said, just as I was just saying to you, like he's uncomfortable, looking at it as a piece of activism or anything. It's still just sort of a dispassionate response to this sort of thing, and rendering it in sound, but without a clear message attached. Which I think, it's such a hard line to walk, but he's everything he writes just like skates right along it. It's really, really great.
It's hard to handle that line too.
Oh,
and
yeah.
It's something
you see people just careening off the side of it all the time in all forms of art, but music especially, and instrumental music most especially, I think.
Yeah, I think it's hard, and I think it's hard to sort of communicate those sort of like hard and fast, pro and con argument type, like you said, activism.
Yeah,
it's hard to do that with instrumental music unless you're putting it in the liner notes.
Yeah. So one of my great friends is a photographer, and he's a fine art photographer. He's out in he moves around a lot. Right now, he's in New Mexico. And he and I talk a lot about this because it's also it's a problem that photographers face, especially if he's a landscape photographer, and it's very hard to make a photograph that makes people think, especially in the subject of environmental degradation, and the photographers who are able to kind of show something and make you question it or think twice about it, and have it, and yet the photograph is not a piece of journalism; it's a piece of art. It's hard. Yeah, because it's so hard to. If you can show a barrel of toxic waste in in an ocean, it's like it would have the effect, but it wouldn't be beautiful. It would be kind of I don't know. It's a hard line to walk between like presenting objective argument and presenting here is this artwork that will challenge you.
Yeah. We've run a little long here, but do you have time for another song?
Oh yeah. I can play. I'll play Abilene. This is the one I was talking about earlier about driving across Kansas. So we can draw it full circle. Thank you so much for having me by. This is really fun.
Yeah, for me too. Anytime. We're gonna hear Abilene. For those of you who have just tuned in, my guest today is Ben Cosgrove, and he's here with his piano, and we're gonna hear another track.
Awesome.
It's always such a pleasure to watch a good pianist work. I'm always mystified by how you can get 10 fingers to work together like that.
Well, sometimes they don't. Are you a pianist?
No.
Well, yeah. You're the best kind of audience in that case.
No, and I love the piano. I have no musical training. I'm not really competent on any particular instrument. I like, in terms of the little bit of noodling around I can do, I like the noodling around I do on the piano the best.
That's a great instrument.
The way it's laid out in a linear fashion, to me, makes more sense than almost any other instrument I've ever tried to play.
Oh, yeah. So this is actually, I totally forgot to mention this. The project I'm working on right now is, so I was talking earlier about how, like, the CDs are pretty lush, and they've got all these kind of trombones and triangles and weird stuff on them, thunderstorms and whatever. But when I play live, as you've seen, it's me and this thing. And for a while, I regarded the performances I had to do on a piano as sort of a, inferior version of these songs. And then it would kind of direct people to the CDs and they could hear what I actually thought they sounded like. And then the more I did it, I regarded it as this sort of, it's like making a line drawing instead of a collage. It's a different set of challenges. And I love the idea of kind of reducing a song to what is most important about it. And here you have this sort of board in front of you from which you can summon high notes and low notes, and you really have to, you only have 10 things that you can use to pull these sounds out of it, and you have to really think hard about how to make it happen. So I recorded all the shows I played for the end of last year and beginning of this year, and I've been compiling a live CD. So that's been my, like, I'm over in Warren all summer, kind of with headphones on, hashing this out and stressing out about wrong notes and that kind of thing.
Which always brings me to, at the end, at least it's by the end of every program, what's the next project? When's it?
That's it. That'll hopefully be end of the summer, beginning of the fall. I'll have it out. If indeed I ever stop kicking myself for
if you can get
what I regard as imperfect, versions of these things. But yeah, I think it'd be neat because people ask if I have recordings of solo piano things. I never do, and I thought this was kind of the best way I could justify it.
It's always nice to have a live album too.
Yeah, and I like the idea that it'll be kind of from all over. Like here's a recording from Michigan, and here's one from New Mexico, and that kind of thing. So, we'll see how it goes. I'll send one your way for sure.
Well, I was going to say, when it's done, can we have you back?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I like it here.
Yeah, all right.
It's a good spot.
Well, we'd love to. Yeah, we'd love to have you back when there's a finished album, and we'll talk more about that. I think we could probably talk for another hour.
Oh yeah, no, this has been great.
Right. I've got some work to do. Seeing as how I haven't actually gotten to the rest of the show yet, and there's like 15 minutes left.
Oh my God, I'm sorry.
No, don't apologize. It was great. Thank you so much for coming down.
Anytime.
I really appreciate it. My guest today is Ben Cosgrove, and we're going to go out on another track. Let's hear that track Nashua. We didn't do that one.
Oh yeah, sure.
All right. That's number 4.
Yep.